Welcome to the Living While Loving Your Child Through Addiction podcast. Here, we focus on self care as we tend to our own lives while also extending love and compassion to our kids. This podcast offers science backed skills to bring hope and healing to your entire family. Today, we have a returning guest, Jeremy French from Making Whole. He was originally on episode number 112. And last time we talked about the philosophy behind making whole, how building furniture became a way to build a life in recovery. Today, I want to go a little bit deeper into what the experience is actually like for the people who come to you so that the families who are curious but hesitant to this approach have a better understanding of it. So, thank you for making the time to come back today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So let's start with just a brief overview of what making whole is and how you started doing this work for anybody who didn't listen to the last episode so that they aren't
Mm.
lost.
So I guess the how I got here first is that all my friends kept dying, and I started asking the question: Is there a way to help people? Men who are committing suicide and men who are overdosing, and the death toll, especially in the from the early 2000s, was really kind of bleak. Two of the men who were witnesses at my wedding or died. A lot of people that I've been really close to. And so I started really wondering, can you help somebody? Right. Um, I think anybody who is close to the world of recovery recognizes that certain people are ready to get better and you can't put anything between them and getting better. It kind of doesn't matter where they land, they're going to get better. And then there's a group who, maybe at some point they're gonna wanna get better, and then there's this other group that doesn't want any part of it. And so, I've seen a lot of people who wanted to get better, who got better. What I've not seen a lot of is people who weren't really ready get better. And so the question that I was sitting with is, can you, take somebody who's not really ready to get better and put them in an environment where the outcome of that environment, the natural byproduct of that environment is that they end up on a journey towards health and towards well-being and towards prosperity and flourishing. And so making whole is basically my response to that question. I started thinking about the people I know who had gotten better and who had continued to get better. And I'd been sober at the point that I created this place, and was envisioning it for 20 something years. And so I had a list of people that I'd seen them, witnessed them in their life and seen, sort of from the inside, intimately into how they got better. And there was two common denominators for everybody I had known who had gotten better. And one was that there was always a story about a person at the beginning of their journey. There's like a mentor or a sponsor, or somebody that they looked up to, somebody that they were willing to trust. That was true with everybody. Everybody has that story. The other thing that was a bit more curious is that all of them had either a profession or a hobby that they're passionate about that required that they solve new complicated problems, every day, right? And so that actually coincides with my definition of what creativity is, which is basically solving complicated problems. It's a process by which you solve complicated problems. And so, these were mothers and CEOs and creatives and athletes, all these people. And what they would do is this thing that they were passionate about, they would take the lessons from that journey and reapply that back in their lives. And it created like a buy in into the idea of recovery, where recovery became something that was authentic for them and genuine for them. And the lessons, it was less about the sort of trope that I learned a bunch in recovery and I took that into my professional life. It was more like the professional life made recovery real and made it something that people would buy into. So as I started considering how do you create a place that will help people, an environment that will help people get to that point where they have access to people that can be that inspiration on the front end, and then a way where they begin to interface with complicated problems and in which that environment has the tools to solve those complicated problems. And so this was a natural evolution of my professional life. I've been a craftsman for 30 years, and it's the language that I speak. I've made a professional career out of solving complicated problems. People come to me when they don't have a good solution to build something. And so that's the language I speak. It seemed like the easiest way for me to get through to the people that I was trying to help, because it allows me to speak metaphorically about work, and it gives us a physical task to do to kind of help us talk through what we're doing. So that's what it is. It's an apprenticeship. We build furniture, and build architectural elements, things for the home. We work in wood, we work in metal, we work in architectural concrete, and we do really complex, challenging high-end work. And it's a group of men that's what they do every day. They build things together, with the sort of umbrella over the whole thing of how do the people that show up here become whole? That's the question. So there's a overview.
Yeah, and I think that one of the reasons why I was so intrigued about making whole was because it's filling this empty space in recovery where, you know, the people who are really struggling to build a life that feels worth living, where do they go and what do they do?
Right.
Um,
And to that point, I think it's important that when we talk about recovery and we talk about addiction, um, I think it's kind of assumed that we're all talking about the same thing. And I think we're not. I don't think that when the world hears addiction, I think most people have the problem wrong. I think for me, um, what I believe happened to me is when I got high the first time, if I had a list of 15 problems in my life, at that time in my life, getting high solved 14 of them instantly, and it consistently did that instantly. And so I've got, siblings and other people that kinda came up in the same environment I did, people that came up in harsher environments than I did, more traumatic environments than I did, that also got high, but they had a different relationship to it. And as I've talked to those people and kind of investigated that, they didn't have that experience of 14 of the 15 problems they had being solved. They had some of the problems solved. It's like everybody has a problem solved when they drink the first time. It's just a question of how many problems are solved. And so I think the way our brains work, if something's that effective, our brain's like, all right, we're putting that in the Rolodex. And every time we need to call on a solution to this problem, that's the solution. And what it ends up happening is that it becomes a repetition, it becomes a habit, it becomes something that's ingrained in the brain and becomes profoundly like we have chemical pathways now that's the solution every time, right?
Mhm.
So getting high was my solution. It's not the problem. So if we begin there, then what's the problem? The problem is that my solutions make my world smaller. And so that's my ultimate litmus test to decide how do I do things in my personal life today. Am I being successful in that work? Are the outcomes that my life is bigger or smaller? That's ultimately the thing that decides whether I continue to do something or not. And what was happening with drugs is it was making my world smaller and smaller and constricted to the point where I couldn't move. Had no room to breathe. I was terrified. I was incapable of doing basic things, right? So my problem is that my solution for life is making my world smaller. And so if that's where we begin the conversation, as opposed to I've got this condition and it's this thing inside of me that's just there, probably got handed down to me. I'm probably powerless over the fact that I got it. And we gotta like fix this thing in my brain, almost like a tumor or like this almost external force that's entered into my world. That's a different set of solutions to a problem than if I don't have tools to exist in the world in the world in a way that my life gets bigger. And so from that lens, if what this is an exercise in doing is collecting tools that we can apply in life, um, that make our world bigger, it to me, the very definition of that is it's going to take a lot of time. And so one of the things for me is that a lot of the lessons that I've witnessed guys here take on in 6 months or 9 months are lessons that it took me 10 years to come to, right? Not because I wasn't willing, it's because they were never presented to me, right? How to show up to work, right? It took me a long time to figure out even what that meant, right? Because in my world, my perception of what was going on wasn't the same as what was happening, right? So it took me running up against the same brick wall in just the rhythm of life so many times before I could learn a lesson. And so how can you concentrate the collection of tools and the collection of new solutions um, in a shorter period of time? That's, that's the question. So to your point of, we have this, we're using the day, in somebody's early recovery. We're using as much of that day as we have access to start to reshape somebody's life.
Yeah. First, I love that explanation because it really humanizes a person's substance use. Um, you know, there's this thing that I teach parents. It's called the invitation to change, and we talk about how behaviors make sense. And one of the first things is this list of things that anybody would want, like to sleep better, to feel more confident, all of these things. And, it talks about how that's what substance use easily checks off everything on this
All of them
list. Yes.
at once, easily
Yes.
accessible and instant, right?
Yeah.
I think in fact, um, the pattern that creates addiction is a pattern that exists in every human being.
Mhm.
And the difference is the phenomenon for the people for whom 14 of the problems get solved. That's the difference, right? But we all do this. Hey, I have this experience when I do this thing. I'm going to keep doing it, right? It's very much the base animal response to life. It's how we've evolved as animals is to do that very thing. I think it's very much the part we get wrong in assessing what the problem is. Now, it over a period of practice, it did become something that changed my brain chemistry, right? So I'm not trying to diminish the dialogue about addiction and how it's hijacked our brains. I just think the mechanism that got us there is different than the one we've kind of all collectively just agreed on, you know?
Mhm. And I think that description you made about the world, the solution to your problem, making your world smaller, actually describes what, like, happened to me as a parent and what I happen to see happen to other parents is they're looking for solutions to try to help their child, their world gets much smaller too, and we end up in very similar places, but not really being able to actually see that. So, that's another reason why I like your description because it's something that I can easily relate to, even though
Sure,
I
yeah.
had never struggled with substance use.
Well, the pattern is the same, right? The pattern of how I continue to run up against a brick wall and a parent does too. And that sort of pattern of feeling trapped and feeling like you don't have any options and feeling hopeless. Um, all those things, those are the same. It's the same phenomenon. And that's one of the things that I talk with parents a lot about is, a lot of people call me and talk to me about their loved one, right? Whether that's a parent. Yep. Last night it was a brother of a guy. And where the conversation invariably goes is, before you can help anybody, you have to find out what it means to be in your own skin and to exist in the world. And that, I think for a lot of people, that's a revelation and it feels like a relief because you got something actionable you can do as opposed to try to save somebody that doesn't want any part of your help. But the other thing it does, invariably, is people leave those conversations feeling more connected to their loved one because of the shared experience, the shared suffering, the shared sort of pattern of life getting smaller. And I think, in terms of recovery, Um, as people become to feel more human, the likelihood of flourishing is increased dramatically, and that's true for the whole family unit. The person, who's typically the center of the conversation, which is the drug addict, but the whole family unit as well. Yeah, it's a journey for all of them.
Absolutely. So, what's an apprentice generally like when they first get to your program?
Mm, one of the things I've always been very serious about is making sure that there's a diverse group of guys here. and that goes for backgrounds, politics, aptitudes, liabilities, age, so we'll have, there was a time where we had an 18-year-old and a 60-year-old and literally everybody in between. And so it ends up being a real diverse age. And with that comes a diverse response to walking into a shop. And so we have some people who come here who are just tickled to be in a shop. This is as far as studios go, this studio is wonderful. It's a wonderful place to work. It's my favorite shop I've ever been in. I've been to shops around the world, and I've never been in one I enjoy more than this one. And so certain people are enamored by that and they enjoy that. There's plenty of people that come here that are terrified, that don't know how to read a tape measure. The number of guys that show up here that are like zombies, over medicated, overwhelmed, completely incapable of just like knowing how to show up to the most basic things. So you have that whole spectrum from people who show up as zombies and people that think they just won the won the lottery to spend their days here. It's hard to say. I think, um, yeah. So it's a big range of how people show up here. There's not a requisite that's connected to somebody's aptitudes or their current emotional experience. The requisite is that you're willing to show up and sit with whatever that is. That's the only requisite.
So they don't have to have, like, woodworking experience or be creative?
Now, it's one of the things a lot of people who refer to this program, a lot of people who get referred to this program, a lot of times you hear it's like, oh, they're creative, they're so creative. My definition of creativity is broader than the world's in a sense. I've met very few drug addicts who are not real creative. Like, get a guy in a basement who wants to cop dope, and you're gonna find the most creative son of a bitch on the planet. They're gonna climb roofs and, hustle money and do all sorts of stuff, right? Those are creative people, right?
Mhm.
Intelligent, sensitive, aware problem solvers. I've met very few drug addicts who don't fall into that category, but a lot of people associate the work that we're doing and think, "Oh, that's the point," and it's not. We've had a lot of people that literally they don't know how to read a tape measure. They've never considered doing woodworking in their lives. They're accountants by trade. They're people that don't wanna do anything. They're video gamers. They're people that, whose lives have gotten small, and so they're yeah, again, this isn't designed for the creative guy to give him something to do while recovery takes place. This is an environment where it happens to be that the tool that we use to have a conversation, it involves building things. But that's all the building part is. It's, to me, it's the least interesting part of what happens here on a daily basis. And we do very interesting stuff, work-wise. Our work is in magazines. We're about to be featured on, This Old House TV show, like their 40 something season of doing work. That work we do is recognized work, but it's the least interesting part of what we do.
Mhm. So, if a person has, like, struggled to hold a job or maybe, hasn't worked much in their life, could they still come and be an apprentice and be successful? Have you had people like that?
So we just did a case study on one of our apprentices here for a letter we're about to send out, who was a CPA who got fired from every job he ever had. Um, and he's now like maybe I guess he finished in early 23 and has been at a firm since then, national firm, and he's crushing it, absolutely crushing it. We've had a lot of guys, high school dropouts, guys that have never held jobs. Obviously a lot of people whose only work experiences in restaurants or places where there's not a high bar for entry. And not many people show up here with a work ethic. It's not common for somebody to really have a work ethic. When they get here, there's people that want to have a work ethic. There's people with aptitude towards work ethic. And then there's people that are like, would be happy to be on their phone all day long, would prefer to be in a basement playing video games. You have that whole spectrum. And I'm happy to meet any of those people. In some respects, the people who are most connected to this place, like people who come from the trades, they have a harder time collecting what this place has to offer than somebody who's got no experience with it. because they assume they know something. And kind of like the guys who don't know anything, that's where I want to start with anybody, you know. Somebody shows up to me, by definition, they don't know what they're doing, right? People don't show up to me because their life is good, right? And so the sooner we can get to that baseline, the better. And so if somebody thinks that they're really good at woodworking, you know, they struggle a bit more here, frankly.
And what if somebody has treatment exhaustion? Like, can you kind of explain what that is and then how that helps an apprentice when they're in your program?
You know, I'm a father, so I can appreciate when things go sideways with your kids. And so when things go really sideways, what do you do? Right. And so we've had a lot of guys who have come here whose treatment stories start when they're young teenagers. Right. And my treatment story started when I was 16. And the places I went were, um, how do I put this accurately? They were prisons for me. You know, prison would have been an easier place. And I've been to prison and I've been to treatment, and prison was easier. Prison, you get to sneak cigarettes, you know, and at the time I went to treatment, there was no sneaking cigarettes. Um, it's a really brutal place, and it's a brutal place where the population is a bunch of people who nothing's working for them, and the staff oftentimes are, particularly in adolescent treatment, are basically tasked with keeping the population from taking over the world, you know, and so it's an exhaustive place, and I think a lot of people, you know, when you consider for me, this was the value proposition that treatment offered me, is that we think that your solution for life is bad. We think you're defective for using that solution for life. And we think you need to give that solution up. And the reward for doing that is that you get to return to the thing that you're trying to avoid in the first place. It's kind of a shitty value proposition. Like if we were building treatment the way you build any business entity in this country, y- you attract people to your solution, right? You solve their problems, right? And so you create something that people want and they show up or they don't based on how badly they want it. Treatment is involuntary more often than not, even when it appears voluntary. And people are put in a situation that feels like a trap. And so if you've done that enough times, eventually you just don't believe that there's anything there for you. So a lot of the guys who have come through here have just a laundry list of treatments that they've been to, types of treatments that they've been to, and have all been unsuccessful. And this will probably be a question you ask. There's a guy who's here now who relapsed recently, and he's been in treatment. I think he's in his sort of late 20s, and he's been in and out of treatment since he was probably a late teenager. And it's become a pattern for him, right? Where you get put in treatment, you do well because you want to perform for the people around you, you wanna kinda get back to health, things return to normal, and then you bounce back out and drink again, you know, and it's this cycle, and he's in that cycle. And what he wanted to be here, and so he relapsed, and immediately he's like, "I want to come back." And what that provided me is a moment of leverage that I don't know a lot of treatment centers get, where, well, if you want to come back, then it's going to beg a dialogue about how do we get here? Why did we get here? What's missing? You know, what's missing from your life? And that's a real typical pattern of what happens here. Here's a guy that wants to be here. I have this opportunity because there's nothing written in stone about how do I deal with relapse. I get to be responsive to the situation entirely, right? And so there have been people who've relapsed where I said, "All right, it's time for you to go." And the reason I would say that is because they don't want to be here. And somebody that doesn't want to be here cannot get anything out of it more likely than not, right? I guess that's not entirely true. There have been people who stuck through not wanting to be here long enough to where eventually they did. But then there's other people where I can say, "Yeah, let's get you back on Monday." And then there's other people where it's like, I need you to do some things to show me that you hear what's happening in your life." And that's a sort of problem-solving methodology we take to a lot of things, relapse included here, of like, "What are we learning from this?" Right? You've been doing this since you were a kid. What's going to change? What's different? Why don't you want to do this? Right? Do you want to do this? Of course, all his instinct responses are like, I want to get better. I'll do whatever it takes. But it's all bullshit. What he's been trained on how to talk his way out of trouble. Right? He knows what to say. He's been in treatment long enough. Um, so I don't believe him. I see through that. I know what it feels like to be in that situation. And so that dialogue shifted into like, what do you actually want to get out of your life? Your world's getting smaller. Same conversation about your solutions are making your world smaller.
Yeah. Um, so it's not, you don't have like this one size fits all approach where if somebody has a return to use that they're automatically out of the program. There's
Yeah.
that really important dialogue about how do we move on from here?
Right. Yeah. I I rely heavily on failure. I've never met a drug addict that's good at failure. And I've never read a success story that's 10 chapters long that's not 9 chapters about failing. And so that's a problem, right? If failure is a requisite for success, more often than not, especially success stories that are worth telling, then we're gonna have to get good at failing. And so I embrace failure. I fail here frequently. This has been a challenging year for me with the work we do, and we've had a lot of failures, like more than I've had since I was a young man, creating things. And I embrace it. I don't enjoy that, but I embrace the opportunity um, to walk through that. I've failed enough in my life that my relationship to failure doesn't cripple me, doesn't paralyze me. I'm not going to say I'm graceful and wonderful when I fail, but I'm not crippled. And there was a moment in my life where just the smell of failure would have paralyzed me, would have crippled me. And so I want people to experience failure here in a place that's safe, in a place where people are seen and heard and considered, so that they can start to develop a new relationship to that. So in some respects, we would consider somebody relapse and a failure, and I genuinely look at that as an opportunity, just like I would any other failure, right? And so this isn't a dance of recovery. Should not be this performative thing where you get everything right. That's not real. Recovery is a dance with how do we interface with this ever changing life that never stops moving, that always sends you new input, right? That's the question. That's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's somebody that doesn't have a toolkit to exist in a world where the problems are always changing. And so I would like to equip people with tools that are responsive to that reality. You're going to go once you leave here, you're going into a world where things are always changing. The problems are always different. We don't know what's going to happen. What tools do you want to carry into that? And we can be certain that failure and suffering are going to be part of the story going forward. So if we're not willing to interface with that and find a place where that's not devastating, then I think that there's very little hope for people to genuinely recover, to find an authentic life if those things are to be avoided. And I think a lot of recovery is designed to do that. Like, how do we not fuck up? Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that reframe that recovery is not supposed to be performative, that we shouldn't expect it to be linear and, you know, easy and just like, oh, like a destination.
No, none of it is. I mean, I think a lot about any other, like I'm an athlete. And so I'll see friends that'll blow out their knees or something, especially as I get older, everybody's blowing out their knees. And so if you consider what ACL recovery is like, you know, I don't see, addiction recovery looking much different. And for a while, you think, after surgery or after the injury's gone, there's a moment where you can walk around and you think, shit, everything's good. And then you twist and you're like, oh God, crump- crumple to the ground. If you really want to get back to like athletic levels, there's a level of suffering and commitment and misery for somebody that's trying to return from an injury like that. Why would recovery be any different?
Mhm.
It's true. I think it's true with any sort of like regaining of health, or in particular, like transforming into something new, right? I think recovery is kind of a I was never trying to recover something that I had before, so I don't think recovery is necessarily the right word.
Mhm.
But I think maybe a better way to think about the recovery is going from a caterpillar to a moth or a caterpillar to a butterfly. Sounds prettier, I suppose. What happens is you curl up and everything that was a caterpillar turns into ooze, dissolves. And then out of this sort of cocoon comes something that doesn't resemble a caterpillar in any way. That's probably a better way to think about what recovery is like. And so early on, you're figuring out, how do I fully dissolve? Uh,
Yeah. So metamorphosis.
Right. That's a better word for it. Let's talk about it like that. What's the metamorphosis process look like?
Mhm. So in thinking about somebody having a return to use, do you guys do drug testing or anything like that there?
So, you mentioned we treat everybody differently. Everybody that's come here is human, and no human's the same. And so while you'll hear a lot in treatment, individualized treatment, I think that people mean that. I treat everybody here differently. I treat them based on who they are and what they need. And so when somebody comes here, I, I am good at what I do, and I'm not good at the things I don't do. And that's why I don't do them. So I'm not a good sober living house manager. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not any of those things. I'm not a good drug tester. So my philosophy is that the people who are best at those things are not people that work for big venture capital corporations. The best uh, sober living guy I know runs his own place, and he's top level. That's all he does. All he thinks about is, how do I help the guys who are here? Private practice therapists that have a reasonable caseload. Those are the people that are the best at what they do. So when somebody comes here, some people come here and they've got a treatment team already in place, and we're in addition to that treatment team. And all we're doing is we're filling a void in that sort of treatment plan. And in which case everybody has their own lanes and takes care of those lanes, right? There's other people that come directly to us that do not have a treatment plan. And at that point, it becomes our job to help build a team around them that's going to provide the needs that they have, right? And so a lot of times if somebody's moving to Asheville, they will end up in sober living because that's the easiest way to get integrated into a community. It's the easiest way to kind of have a base, to have a rhythm, have a pattern, have some structure. Sometimes people aren't in sober living when they get here. They live with family. There's other situations. It's not that there's a strict script. And so the same thing goes for meetings and goes for drug testing and goes for therapy, is that those are all valuable components to a life in metamorphosis, let's say. Um, None of them are requirements. So the question is, what is the right combination of components to give somebody the best chance of success? And so we've had plenty of people here who are not drug tested. We've had other people who've been here for years that continue to be drug tested, initially not because they wanted to be, but further down the road, they realized it was a way to develop a level of trust with the people around them. So they're happy to do it, right?
Mhm.
That to me is like, that's the biggest success story, is that there's an individual here now who's been with us. He's now staff. He's been with us quite some time. And he continues to be drug tested. And one of the reasons why is it develops ease with his relationship with his family. He's a great hustler. He'll tell a lie to your face and you'll believe it, right? And so how do you rebuild trust with somebody that's that clever? I mean, a drug test helps that, right? And so everybody in that scenario is happy to continue to do drug testing. So if somebody's real sneaky, like, I'd rather you get drug tested, right? And if there's a chance that that doesn't have to be something that I help facilitate because of the treatment team that they have. In the case that there's not a treatment team in place for them that is facilitating that, then I will facilitate ensuring that that happens. I'm not the one giving the drug test, but we know people who give drug tests, right? The
Mhm.
same goes for therapy. There's a lot of people that arrive here that have been in therapy their whole life, and they don't tell the truth in therapy. They don't want to be in therapy. And so for me, I'm going to say, don't be in therapy. If you're not going to get the value out of this environment, a therapeutic environment, then take a break, right? And the moment comes invariably, everybody I've had that conversation with, a couple of months in, will end up with a problem that they can't figure out. They're in the squirrel cage in their head. And that's when a conversation about, do you think speaking to somebody about this honestly could help you develop a different perspective about this? And that's when the therapy conversation becomes them. They're incentivized at this point to go look for a solution and speak to somebody truthfully. And therapy doesn't work if you're not telling the truth. Anybody can show up and lie to somebody for an hour, and that person that they're lying to, what are they going to do with that? They can't help you. But I know therapists who have experienced somebody showing up and just telling them the truth, and immediately, like, years worth of therapy can happen in a month because somebody's really engaged in their part of hauling the load of doing therapeutic work. The same is true for meetings. There are guys that are like, I just don't resonate with that. Um, and what meetings do is that they fill a couple of different types of check boxes in the metamorphosis journey. One of them is community, a sense of accountability. One of them is a sort of a rhythm and a pattern and a daily habit where you check in to what it is you're meant to be doing every day. And one of them is guidance on starting to do uh, the internal work, the personal work to rearrange yourself, right? And so if somebody can find a way to do those things authentically, and there are plenty of guys who have come through here that do that, then I'm all for it. I'm agnostic when it comes to specific modalities or methodologies that people use. One of the things that we've had the conversation about ayahuasca and MDMA and ketamine, all those things. Obviously, those things come up with frequency. And I have encouraged people to do that. And I have told other people, absolutely, I do not condone that, right? Because every one of those things is situational. I will say for myself, hallucinogens change the way I see the world. I've done enough of them. If I go back to do an ayahuasca retreat, I'm looking for something different. Somebody that's never done that, that has some sort of, um, aptitude and curiosity about it, and they're under the right kinda guidance and care. Like, I'm not the one to tell you what's right and wrong here. What I wanna do is make sure that the sort of scaffolding in your life around you is situated such that if you decide to go make an autonomous decision with your own agency that's designed to help you become who you're meant to be, my job is to make sure that scaffolding's in place. So if it's great, it's great, and we've had, apprentices that have actually gone and done that type of thing with their families. Apprentice and his father go to Costa Rica, do ayahuasca, it changes both of them, completely transforms their entire family,
Mm.
right? What my job through that was to make sure the scaffolding is, if this goes sideways, if this doesn't work out, what's gonna happen then, right? It There's this sort of puritanism about recovery where if you make a mistake, you're screwed, and I don't believe that. The question is, when you make a mistake, because you'll do things that are stupid and ridiculous, what's around you? Like, how do you solve the problem that then ensues, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so I'm hearing a very customized scaffolding for each person. And so they might have different living situations. They might have different situations as far as therapy or support. Um, it's medication assisted treatment.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. For me, I do not understand why Sublocade is not the gold standard and the only thing that's prescribed. Um, my experience with men on Sublocade is night and day from my experience with men on Suboxone. And for me, my theory about that is that there's one thing to have a daily routine where you maintain the experience of being all right in your own skin. And it's another thing where you just have a chemical crutch to help ease your brain back into real life that is not a pattern, right? Once a month, you go get a shot. It's like anything, like an allergy shot, right? I know that there's people that are successful in Suboxone. I don't have any qualms with people doing that. But if somebody comes to me, again, this is a conversation about what are we building together in your life, right? And what's the way we can do that? There's yet to be a situation where there was a conversation with one guy where they had an allergic reaction to Sublocade, and that's a different conversation, right? Um, but for the most part, that makes more sense, and guys are happy to do it. Again, I'm agnostic when it comes to methodologies. What I'm curious about is how are you structuring the solution that you have in your life, right? And so I see MAT used in ways that I don't see being long-term beneficial, and I see MAT being used as a bridge to get somebody to firm ground, right? And anytime that's the mentality, that's something that I resonate with and I'm going to support fully. And MAT is one, but there's medications across the board that are worth conversations. Um, so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of guys who obviously come here and they've got a heavy dose of medicine, and I'm agnostic about that too. You know, are you talking with the psychiatrist about it? Are you working through that? What are your goals? What do you believe you can do? Um, how do you do that? Right? There's a lot of people that want to get off medicine. I don't condone that in the sense of quit taking your meds, but I do condone that there's a pathway to figure out if you can do that or not. Right? And one of the key elements of that is, are you supported if you fall down? What is the consequence of that fall gonna be, right? If you fall down and there's people around you to catch you, that consequence is gonna be minimal, right? But if you're alone on a cliff and you fall down, it's gonna kill you, right? And so
Mhm.
this isn't a question about whether it's okay to fall down or not. I think a lot of times this goes back to this point of, I think a lot of recovery, people are so fearful that bad shit's gonna happen that what we're trying to do is ward off any negative things, as
Mhm.
opposed to anticipating the bad things are going to happen and have a dialogue about what does that mean. Falling down is not bad, you know. Kid falls down, that's where they learn how to exist in the world, right? Kid falls down and their parents freak out, they get a clue about what that means, right? Same thing here. I don't care how we get there. Everybody has a different idea of life. I think there's this thing. I'm a soccer fan, and there's this tool. I don't know. I think it's called Opta, where they'll take an athlete and they'll basically rate their strengths. And so what it is a circle. Kind of the center of the circle is 0, and the outside of the circle is 10. And if you imagine a bunch of lines coming into the circle, and each one of those lines represents a different aptitude, right? So defense, sorry, defense, speed, passing, all these things, right? And and so what it creates are these weird star-shaped patterns, where people are really good at one thing and not so good at the other. There's not an athlete on the planet that's a full circle, right? Everybody has aspects that are lower, so it creates these sort of spikes around the outside. And that's the way I see people, right? So somebody that's got these big strengths, there's areas where they can improve, there's areas where they need to really ensure that they're excelling. And so that's the question is, when you look at somebody's map of their assets and their liabilities, their aptitudes, what they're curious about, like, life should be built based on that to some extent, and everybody's looks different, and that's supposed to be that way. There's no such thing as somebody that's good at everything or bad at everything. Neither one of those things are real, right? Um, and so I want to be cognizant of that and be as versatile as we can at seeing somebody as they are and helping them see themselves in the same way that we do.
Yeah, I liked really hitting all of those points because I think that families, when they're in fear, they really look for that rigid structure, trying to create safety and certainty.
Right.
And so that's why treatment centers can be so appealing and why we don't really question why it's not working or why it's not going well or is this the best fit for my kid. But the way you talked about that, I think helps us to really look at the person and what they need, what's going to help them grow, what's going to be best for them. And taking that approach, I think, is um, maybe one of the reasons why somebody who has really struggled in their metamorphosis and, is able to come there and flourish.
Right. So I think this ties into a longer conversation that I don't want to get into, but businesses are designed to meet their clients' needs, period. It doesn't matter what business we're talking about. McDonald's knows who their clients are, knows what their problems is, solves that problem. That's why they're successful, right? Their clients are people that want food that's inexpensive, that's quick, that's consistent, right? And they deliver that solution really well. If you go to McDonald's looking for health food, they've tried that. McDonald's salads don't crush it because that's not their client base. It's not what they're good at. It's not their lane. That's not what they're there to do, right? Every business solves their customers' needs. When you look at how most treatment is designed, it's designed to do exactly that. And where the disconnect is who the customer is and what do they need. If a parent is trying to send a kid to treatment, the number of times where the problem in the client is the parent, and the problem is they're scared. And the problem is that they think their kids are going to die, right? And those things are true. Parents are scared. It's a scary proposition when your kid's out of control, and when your kid's out of control with something that's national news for how many people are dying about it. That's not the problem, but it's the way that it's the solution that treatment's providing, right? And so when you think about structured treatment, a lot of times that's what it's designed for, right? It's designed to give somebody a respite from this kid or loved one who's crazy, who's destroying shit, who's unmanageable, just and there's benefit for the drug addict in that. It's just not designed to solve their problem. And so I think that that's what a lot of it is. When you hit the nail on the head when you talk about rigidity and structure, who's being served by that? It's not always the drug addict. We have zero rules here. There's no rules. And the reason why there's no rules is you give rules to a drug addict, they're gonna find the loophole. That's what rules do. The rule here is you show up and you act like a man, right? If you're not sure what that means, ask. If you're not sure what that means and you act like a kid, somebody's gonna tell you, right? And they're not gonna hate you for it, but they're not gonna let you not know that that's what's happening. It turns out when you treat people that way, they don't need rules, right? The reason why rules are in place is because somebody's trying to get something that's not allowed, right? And so you gotta create a rule and say, "You can't do that," right? Don't write on the walls. Well, why are we writing on the walls? Because we want attention, right? We need to be seen. We wanna deface this place that we don't respect, whatever, right? If you create a place that people wanna be, and you create a place that makes life more enjoyable, you don't need to tell people what to do. People are gonna figure that out on their own. So, it's subtle, I think. I think that there's a lot of crossover between the problems I'm experiencing as a drug addict and the problems my parents were experiencing dealing with me. There's a lot of crossover. Me being locked up for a period of time was really good. If you let me be free first month I was out, I'm just going back to the place that's familiar, right? If there's not some sort of structure around. But there's a quick end to that, right? And how structured it is, it became a detriment really quickly for me. It became me um deciding that these people, I don't trust the people who lock me up. I don't want any part of that, right? And so I don't believe anything he's saying. I don't believe you, right? The treatment centers that I went to as a kid, I did not believe a soul in there. There's nothing they had that I wanted. I thought that they were kind of boring. I thought their lives sucked. My first therapist was not physically healthy. He wasn't interesting. He was kind of a guy that you could make a meme out of, right? I'm not gonna listen to anything that guy said, but he knew how to interface with my parents in a way that kept them scared and kept the dialogue between them that kept me locked up in treatment. The first treatment I went to, there's this guy, he'd been huffing gas, and he was there for like 2 weeks, and then they let him go. It was done. Meanwhile, my dad's got great insurance. He worked for a great company, and I was there for a long time, and I thought, like, I just smoked too much weed. Like, what are we on about? And I was young. I didn't know what's going on, and I'm like, "Dude, how's, like, Tony better? And Tony gets to get the fuck out of here. And I'm still stuck in this place after 8 weeks." And somebody's like, "Dude, your insurance is good." That's why, right? You watch things play out like that from the inside, and you realize, like, this place ain't designed for me. They're not speaking to me. They've created a solution for my parents. At the time, and my parents are intelligent people, they did really good. They did a lot of the kind of work that you're providing for parents. They were doing it at the same time. But one of the things about every parent that comes into this is that they're an uninformed consumer. They're walking into a marketplace they've never witnessed before, right? It's also a marketplace that people don't openly speak about, right? It's a hush thing. And so a lot of parents will talk to their friend who they find out, well, their kid got fucked up, right? And so it's a hush hush conversation. Like that's how this works, right? One of the fascinating things about this, when I started this business, I was doing research when I was creating my business plan. And one of the pieces of research I did was about Google and what was the cost of AdWords in this space, right? And so every word in the English language has a dollar value connected to it with Google. So if you were going to type that word into Google, you're searching for eyeglasses, eyeglasses has a dollar amount. Let's say it's 25 cents, right? Expensive words are $2 or $3, right? Those are really expensive words. At the time I was doing the research for this, which would have been 2016, 17, around that time, um, the 10 most expensive words in Google, 6 of them were related to addiction treatment. And these were pay per clicks that were like $50, $60 a click. So every time you clicked on that treatment center, they paid $50 to Google. And what they created was a lot of this has been amended since, and there's regulations in place. It's still obscenely expensive to market in this space, but it's not what it was when I was doing the research before there's a lot of crackdowns. But the reason I tell that story is because what you have is an uninformed consumer in a new marketplace where the amount of money being spent to get their attention is unprecedented in any other industry in the world, in the planet. And then when you look at those treatment centers, what they're selling, stock advertising, stock photography, pretty things, is they're selling things to parents. They're selling things to drug addicts who are tired of suffering, right? And so when you look at the value proposition from a marketing standpoint, what people are selling is relief, right? We got the beautiful facility, we got these wonderful things. A lot of what it is relief. So people are paying an obscene amount of money to get your attention to see relief. And of course, that's what anybody wants, right? And so an uninformed consumer ends up in a place that designed their strategy to be seen in response to that. But I would compel anybody to consider, what does the reality of treatment need to look like? What does the first year of metamorphosis look like for anybody? It's suffering, right? So the real conversation is, here is a container where you are going to suffer. And we're going to ensure that that suffering is productive suffering and not non-productive suffering. It turns out that's a really hard pitch to sell when people are just Googling looking for equine therapy and jacuzzis and beautiful spots, right? But it's what I believe we're here to do. If you're going to get, I've never met somebody in recovery um, that doesn't talk about suffering early on. Some people get it, they feel great out of the gate or feel great after a little time, but there's a story about suffering. It's a challenging proposition. And some of that suffering, I don't believe is necessary. And some of that suffering could be really productive if it was being held in the right container. And that's really what I'm looking for, is to make sure that the suffering people are experiencing is suffering that leads to an end of growth and transformation. Not all suffering does that. Some suffering is just makes the world smaller, right?
Yeah. So, in that container of growth and transformation, I think that relates to, you ask for a 1-year time commitment for any apprentices. Why is that length of time so important?
So the short answer to that, we're coming up on the holidays. It used to be in my life, if it was January, you could come find me in some institution, whether it was jail or treatment or whatever, right? You starting Thanksgiving, I'm not a holiday guy. I suffer a lot around the holidays. Not my thing, right? Starting on Thanksgiving, my mental health starts shitting the bed. And by January, I'm done for. You stick a fork in me. That's compounded by the fact that the season, less light, I thrive being outside, being active, being physical. So this combination of the challenge around the holidays, the breaks around the holidays, the seasons changing, I'm going to treatment in February. January, February is when I'm going to treatment, right? When April comes, man, I feel so damn good. I don't care what's going on, right? Spring's out. I live in Appalachia. It's stunning. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Like I could feel really damn good in April, right? So if I go to 90 days of treatment, I'm going to come out of that, regardless of how good the treatment is. I'm going to step outside. I'm going to feel great. Everybody's like, shit, Jeremy's doing great. When he went into this place, he was a manic mess. And here it is, after 90 days, and he's crushing it, right? And it's all circumstantial. If you wait for Thanksgiving, come find me in Thanksgiving, come find me at Christmas, and I'm losing the plot again. I don't have a way to get through that season. So I think that there's a rhythm to the seasons. I think everybody has a different rhythm to different set of seasons. Um, and whether it's as dramatic as my story or not remains to be seen for any individual. But I think that there's something to that. I think getting somebody through a year where they're being held and there's a container for them to exist in does not hurt anything, right? I think when we consider the scope of what this kind of metamorphosis is asking of somebody to give up this most fundamental solution that they've trained their entire life to do, and suddenly they're going to be different. Like college is 4 years if you want to get a generic degree, right? But if you want to do really well, we're talking about 6, 8, 12 years, right? How is learning how our brain works, which not many people understand, how is that going to happen in a year, right? It's such a short window of time. And so part of the reason for the commitment, first and foremost, is that I want somebody not to be going somewhere in a month in their mind. Not, if somebody wants to leave here in a day, they're welcome to do that, right? They're not trapped. It's about a mental commitment that you're going to sit still and commit to something and not run away. It's not a financial commitment. It's not, somebody can come here for a week and leave, and that's fine. I'm not chasing anybody. It's not going to cost somebody any different than if, based on that commitment. It's about an emotional commitment that you're going to be here now and figure out how to live. That's what the commitment is. And a year seems like an appropriate amount of time. We've had guys, we just went and did a case study with all the people that have been through the program and kind of divvied up who had been through that left before recommendation and left after recommendation. And that recommendation timeline was anywhere from 9 months to 4 years. And and what I'll say about the people who are multiple years, that's on their own volition, right? That's not me trying to tell you you're bad if you don't do this, right? That's they decided this is the sort of container that I need for this period of time. But the 9 months are people that have stated, like, "I wanna go to school." It made sense what they were trying to do. 9 months, the semester starts, and it made sense that, "Okay, this is time for you to go do that thing," right? So at the end of the day, when does somebody leave? Like, I think in we've had 50 something men come through here that have enrolled in here at one point or the other. 33 of them have actually, like, stayed until it was a good time to leave. The number of those 33 that left on their year, like, hardly any, maybe 3 or 4 have said, "Okay, this is my year, I'm doing the next thing." Most of them are here on either side of that. What I'll also say about that study is that of the 50 something men that came through here, 33 have stayed. 30 of those are people that I keep in touch with who are doing well in their life. Of the 3 who aren't, the jury is out in those situations. I'm happy to share uh, that documented evidence with anybody, and I don't know that you're gonna find better results for somebody. Of the people that didn't complete, so the 20 something guys that came through here, there's a wide range of stories. Some of those guys were here for a week, right? Some of those guys never wanted to be here. They said they did, they didn't. I don't hold any of those guys in ill will. Some of those guys in that group are actually doing well and talk about the impact that this place had on them during that period. But of the people who stick it out here, it's really highly likely that you're going to walk out of this place with a different experience about life.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty amazing that I think you said 30 out of the 33 are doing well. I mean, that really speaks to the I think we just there's a lot of times parents have this expectation of like, well, they've been in recovery for 30 days or 90 days. Why aren't they more functional?
Right.
And I think that it just gives them this really safe place to learn to have a new solution to life's problems, to learn how to work through those things with the kind of support that they need while, like, they're living a full life. They're not living that kind of institutionalized life is a
100%.
in a treatment center.
That's a huge part. I think I'm hesitant to describe this place as experiential treatment in the way that wilderness is, but there's a lot of correlations to this in wilderness, just in terms of the fact that we're using an experience as a learning tool. But a massive difference is that this is real, like, this is guys' jobs. If you ask anybody who's here, a lot of them will say, "That's just my job," right? They don't define it as a treatment center. It's real life. The people that commission work are real people. The people that come eat lunch with us are real people. It's open, it's free. Walk out of here anytime you want. And even if you don't become a craftsman, and not many people do become craftsmen. Actually, it's a really tough way to make a living. I don't recommend it. A lot of guys go back to school. The skill set that they're learning is going to be applicable to whatever they do. That CPA is the better accountant today because of the experience you had here, because you learn how to work, you learn how to ask the right questions when he didn't have an answer to a problem. It transformed his ability to be a CPA, because the work we're doing, I don't have all the answers to. The other masters here don't know the answers to a lot of questions. There's guys here that struggle with concrete and do really well with wood. And so what guys are seeing here is what it looks like when somebody's been doing this for 30 years, doesn't know this answer to a problem. What they get to witness is what do you do with that? How do you do that? It turns out that's applicable to anything. So the number of guys who show up here, they're dropouts, so they got a 1.2 GPA, and they just struggle with school, who are graduating now, got master's degrees now. They go back to school and they crush it. They kill it because they're not afraid. They know how to go find the answers to the problems they have. They know how to show up and ask for help. They know how to fail. They know how to show up. Those are the things that you're learning how to do here. Those are critical. So that's real life. I think for me, if you put me on a ropes course, I absolutely loathe heights. I hate being up high, but I'll walk through a ropes course like I'm cruising down the road on a Sunday, because I know that these people can't afford for my ass to fall. So I'm not afraid of it, right? So that this isn't we've not created a fall situation to try have a lesson on. This is a real life situation. And so guys feel like this is real work. They're in the rhythm of working. So it's not like, oh, I was in treatment, completely isolated from the world. Now I've got to reintegrate today. They're here. They're doing their thing. They're having girlfriends. Ultimately they're getting their own places to live. They're figuring out what that is. They're living alone, and they've got a support environment around them. And honestly, I mean, if we're truthful about it, if you ask anybody without connecting the idea of addiction to it, if somebody needed to transform who they were in their mind and become a different person, how long should that take? And what sort of framework should exist around somebody that's going through that transformation? That sort of rite of passage, the rite of passage of becoming an adult, showing up to life, all those things. A year is the least amount of time you're going to hear anybody talk about. Right? That's what college is for. College is for that rite of passage. It's to teach you things that aren't as, um, scary and impactful as, like, shame, right? I'm learning about biology, right? It's inert. Like, it doesn't say anything about who I am, right? And so to me, I think that there should be a lot more environments like this where people have a chance to kinda grow into who they're gonna be.
Yeah. Yeah, I was trying to explain to I was talking to a family about that today, like, using myself as an example. It's been almost 4 years since my daughter passed away, and the first 3 years of me trying to get my life back together
Ooh, man.
as a person, I have over 50 years of life experience. I've had a lot of success in my life. I've worked on myself a lot. So I had a really high level of ability to work through a situation like this. But 3 years of just working so hard but feeling like I wasn't getting anywhere. It wasn't really till the 4th year till I've really started getting momentum.
Mhm.
and when I think about that, it gives me so much more compassion for just really how hard it is to start from nothing
Right.
and to try to rebuild your life with the such
Exactly.
high expectations.
Right. And nobody, like, look, I've been with a lot of parents who are in this situation who've lost a kid. Anybody that expects those parents to be right in a year or 5 years or 10 years has not experienced it. Period, right? Those kind of moments we're not designed for. We've not evolved to do that well. And so I think it's one of the misnomers, and it ties back to what we think the problem is. If drugs are the problem, then you just gotta quit doing drugs, and you get your life back, right? Most drug addicts are smart, they've got aptitudes, they're good around people, or they've got these things that they're really good at. So if we could just stop doing the drugs and just start doing the things you're good at, what's the problem, right? If that's the problem, then it explains why people are so bewildered about why there's a time commitment or why people are so bewildered that things aren't going well. But when you look at it in the context of a problem of somebody having to rebuild, like let's just say you were in a traumatic car wreck and you have to learn how to walk again. How long is that going to take? And that's just muscles, man. That doesn't have the same connection to cultural mythologies and circumstances and having to make a living through it all that kind of stuff, right? There's no other transformation that we do as a species that happens in the way we hope for addiction treatment to happen. It just doesn't work, doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, it's unrealistic.
It's unrealistic, but if we look at it from a metamorphosis standpoint, it starts to change the frame, and most importantly, it makes this feel more attainable and more real and more worth doing, right? Again, if what I have to do is give up drugs, man, I'm not really down with that shit, right? It's like the old Monty Python bit, cake or death. And he's like, I don't know, let's see. That's how I was like, shit, man, I don't know. I don't know which one, sobriety or going back to jail and being, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question because what I know about sobriety is I've never enjoyed that. I was never successful at that. And what I know about getting high is even though I'm like really broken, and when I got sober, I was really broken physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I was completely bankrupt in all departments, but I knew relief on occasion. And when I got sober, it was like, when your arm falls asleep and it's coming back and it's just like pins and needles, right? That's the way my whole experience of being in the world was every fucking day. And so, like, I was familiar with the sort of misery I had with addiction, and I will take comfortable, familiar misery over that pins and needles thing if I don't have some type of assurance that those pins and needles are going away, that there's going to be something that replaces that. And what does that look like? I I don't care about being successful in the world. I didn't trust the world, right? I didn't trust the picture of success. So if somebody was selling to me like, "Oh, you can go back to school," I dropped out of school. I didn't like school. Oh, well, you can get rich. It's like I see rich people. I'm not feeling that. Like none of these things are motivating to me. But it's when somebody talked about like you can exist in your own skin. You can not feel paralyzed everywhere you go. Your world can get bigger. You can get more options that are attractive to you, and not options that I think should be important to you.
Mhm.
Those are the things that started to kind of change the calculus in my head about whether this was worth doing or not.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So I just want to ask one last question.
Sure.
We can wrap up. How do families pay for this? Do you guys take insurance? How does that work?
It turns out insurance is a tricky thing. So one of the things that's tricky about insurance, and this explains some of the costs, is that if you tell an insurance company you need insurance because you're going to teach drug addicts how to use power tools, insurance companies laugh at you. They're like, yeah, why not? We'll give you a coverage. It's called, extreme coverage or whatever. So insurance doesn't recognize what we do. Um, so it's private pay. The tuition is $5,500 a month. Guys get paid $1,500 a month, and part of the reason why they get paid is because if you go to that same insurance company and say, "I've got active meth heads that I'm gonna take onto a roof every day to do roofing. Can I insure them?" They're like, "Yeah, it's called workman's comp." So guys get paid. that payment is enough to start creating sort of a separation, umbilical cord separation financially between families and their loved ones. It provides enough. It's sort of a baseline for people to exist. Mostly, it creates a point of dialogue and a sense of pride. You know, guys are going to get paid consistently, get to manage their own money, and feel a sense of accomplishment for what they do. So it's a private pay thing. You pay effectively by the day, right? So if somebody came here and decided after a week they didn't want to do it, whatever payments have been made get prorated and refunded. So we only charge for the days the guys are here. Um, as far as yeah, that's how that works.
Yeah. I mean, and that's rare that places refund the payment. That's very generous. I mean, most of the time the experience is what you've paid ahead is gone if the person leaves.
See, here's the thing is that I'm charging for the work that I do, and if I don't do the work, I'm not charging for it. That's
Mhm.
I'm not here to take advantage of people financially. It's not what I'm trying to do. The point of tuition is it's how we can afford to create space for people to exist and not feel the pressure of being in a production environment and basically pay for the time. You know, that's really that cost is connected to the time. The time to teach somebody something is really expensive. So yeah, that's what that goes towards.
Well, and what you're giving, I mean, that cost is actually really small when you think about a person rebuilding their whole life and the amount of time and attention and intention that is given there. So, if a family member's listening to this and they want to reach out to you, they want to know more, what's the best way for them to do that?
My phone number is listed on the website, as is my email address. It's Jeremy, Jeremy, at making whole. That's whole with the W, .com. They can send me an email or just give me a call. We got a form on the website people can fill out. And then it's just a conversation. I have conversations with parents all the time. I'm happy to speak with people. You know, when parents have kids here or loved ones here, I'm happy to speak with them anytime. You know, I think that that's the more dialogue there is, the better, more often than not. So people can reach out. People are curious. Um, I'm not afraid to have a conversation about whatever. You know, I talk with a lot of parents whose family members aren't ready, and that conversation. I actually had a conversation a week ago with a mother, and her response to that was like, "This is a really transformative conversation." I am a parent. I know what it means to be a parent. I can see this situation through the lens of a parent, and I'm happy to talk to parents as much for the parent's sake as for their hope of the loved one, you know, finding a way. Um, so yeah, people can reach out, pretty accessible.
Yeah, I'll put the your website in the show notes as well.
Yep. Yep.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview. I
Oh, my
really
pleasure.
appreciated it.
Thanks for humoring me. I get caught on tangents all the time. Carry on.
They were good ones.
Oh, good.